Well, it seems like it may have been a crime of passion.
A Texas teaching assistant is shot and killed just weeks after an Amber Alert is put out for her younger sister.
It's another tragedy that probably should not have happened.
Now, investigators believe they've arrested the man responsible for the murder. But could that gruesome crime be related to the missing persons case?
There's likely there was a history of violence in his past, where as the old saying, "Hurt people hurt people."
On March 3rd, dispatch got a call for a crashed vehicle in Rusk County, Texas, about 2 hours east of Dallas. When first responders arrived to the scene, they found 27-year-old Christina Glenn dead. But they quickly determined her cause of death wasn't the crash, but rather a gunshot wound. 33-year-old Justin Roy Edwards has now been arrested and charged in her murder. Some reports say the pair were dating, but their relationship has not been confirmed by investigators. Retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt says the crime itself doesn't appear to have been premeditated.
Well, it seems like it may have been a crime of passion. That it appears that she was driving the car, and the boyfriend and her may have gotten in an argument, and then it just went downhill from there. And it appears that that's what he did is he shot and killed her, and because they found her in the driver's seat, and then it appears that I think he probably panicked instead of trying to dispose of the body because there was no thought beforehand before he did the crime, that he probably just jumped out of the car, freaked out, and then just ran away. And then law enforcement did their job and found him. When I say passion, it's an emotional response to something that was said or did, and then instead of this person thinking it through and showing knowledge and intent prior to doing the act, they just reacted. And so that's why I say crime of passion, in the sense that it was an emotional reaction because of the way this was set up. Because if the boyfriend or whomever killed her had an intent to do this, he certainly wouldn't have done it in a moving car while he was in there.
Glenn was pronounced dead at the scene of the crash. According to a release from the Rusk County Sheriff's Office, evidence collected during the preliminary investigation there was consistent with murder. My question there is, how did they determine that it was murder, that it wasn't suicide, that a gun didn't accidentally go off? What would lead them to make that determination right away?
Well, once again, it's the body. The state of the corpse, so to speak, is she's got a gunshot wound in the side of her head, and then there's no firearm around or no note. Then it's obvious that it was a third party that killed her. And then, in terms of it being a suicide, exactly that, there would be some sort of instrument of that suicide laying around, whether it be the firearm or if she would want to cut her wrist or something along those lines. But generally speaking, people don't shoot themselves while they're driving. If it's a suicide, it's more going to be in an area that's staged, whether it be a hotel room or in their own home. And there's going to be some planning that goes into it.
Schmidt says investigators likely looked into the aspects of the crash as part of their investigation, too, to determine whether Glenn was driving at the time she was shot.
Well, I think that's depending on how the state of the body. If the airbags have deployed, uh, if there was actual damage to the front of the car, was there other indications? The onboard computer would tell whether there was a crash, and then on the passenger side, is there indicia of blood or some sort of injury to whomever was sitting there as well? Then, of course, they pulled the body out, and then there's a gunshot wound in her. So then, obviously, logical inference is that she was shot, and then she crashed the car after she was shot with a firearm.
Is it possible that domestic violence could play a role in any of this?
Absolutely. I think when they start doing the background on the relationship, there's high probability that there were some injuries that he was lashing out, whether it be emotionally or physically. Once again, if indeed the boyfriend did do it, that's what it appears right now. And that'll be part of the investigation. Also looking at the text messages between the two. Was he making threats? Was he being abusive on via text message or through social media or through WhatsApp or whatever? But yeah, when you see this level of violence, there likely was some sort of precipitating event that led to it.
We still don't know much about the suspect, Justin Roy Edwards. We do know he was involved with a boxing gym, but Schmidt says that pastime is likely unrelated to any domestic violence claims.
I don't think there's a correlation to his hobby, to his or his what he wants to do in terms of domestic violence. I think domestic violence is basically something that happens between two people that is absolutely horrible. The correlation is more about the generally it's the male is the aggressor, not in every case. And there's likely there was a history of violence in his past, where as the old saying, "Hurt people hurt people."
And right now, the suspect, Justin Edwards, is being held on $1 million bond. Do you think that's an appropriate bond number?
Well, the bond is basically indicative of the fact that they don't want him out on the street. So they put it at that level, knowing he's not going to be able to make that bond. Generally, it's 10%. I'm sure he doesn't have $100,000 laying around to put out on a bond, as well as it's unlikely he's got any assets or a family member that's going to put their house up to get him out. So that when you see those $1 million bonds, it's basically because the government and does not want that person back on the streets.
The case takes a bizarre twist when we consider that Glenn's 16-year-old sister went missing just weeks before her murder. At the time of her death, Christina Glenn was a teaching assistant based in Houston. It was Brenham, Texas, about an hour west of Houston, where her sister, Nita Hillen, went missing in early February. She was last seen on February 10th, and an Amber Alert went out weeks later on February 26th. At the time, investigators said the girl was in danger of death or serious bodily injury and could be with someone or several people exposing her to harm. Is there any possibility that these two things could be related?
Well, there's a possibility, and without not having more information, I don't know if there's a probability, but it generally speaking, in law enforcement, there's no such thing as a coincidence. If things like this are occurring, there's definitely a place where law enforcement and the investigators need to dig deeper to see if there is that correlation or connection, and that'll go once again. It'll go back to actually the interview of the individual that they have incarcerated right now. And once again, back to those phones and that social media and the communication and the phone records to see what was going on around that time when that person disappeared.
The Brenham Police Department tells us the 16-year-old has since been found and reunited with her family. But because her disappearance is still under investigation, they can't give out any more information. While we're not sure what went into Nita's disappearance last month, we do know it wasn't her first time disappearing. Last summer, Christina posted to her Facebook, writing, quote, "My sister and I got in a disagreement and she has ran off. She has turned off everything so the close family cannot get in touch with her." At the time, the Houston Police Department Missing Persons Unit put out a missing juvenile alert, classifying the girl as a runaway. Because of her history of repeated disappearances, Schmidt believes it's probably unrelated to Christina Glenn's murder.
It's leading me to believe that there is no correlation between the murder and her missing. There's probably some sort of issue in her own home that she's running away from. So I don't necessarily think there's that correlation. It basically sounds like there's something that's causing her, a catalyst for her to run away, whether it be mental health or whether she's in an abusive home herself. But that's telling me that the correlation isn't really a place to look into. I think, however, the sister will be a good witness to find out if there was a history of domestic violence between the guy that's in jail right now and the decedent.
Meanwhile, the investigation into Glenn's murder is still ongoing. Do you think that an investigation is still ongoing in this case? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think they definitely want to find out exactly what happened, because if they're going to put this guy on trial for murder, they need to have all the details. So they're, like I said, they're digging into all the forms of communication between the two. They're asking witnesses to see if there was a history of domestic violence. Was there something leading up to this? What was the argument about? And even going and looking at that the onboard computer, depending on what kind of car it was, and downloading and seeing if there was some erratic driving happening before this wreck, or a lot of stopping and starting, or anything that would lead them to believe that there was some sort of behavior that was leading up to this event.
Is there any way specifically that investigators would try to track down a motive in this case?
Once again, talking to everybody in their social circle, talking to family members, talking to friends, talking to his friends, looking to see if he'd made any statements to his closest confidants that he had intended on harming her. Were they fighting? Was there some sort of catalyst? Anything and everything could be there, but it's all comes down to just good old fashioned, burning some shoe leather and going out and talking to people.
Anyone with more information about Christina Glenn's murder is asked to contact the Rusk County Sheriff's Office. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.